Hi everyone, and welcome back to a new Angular Spring Boot episode. In this episode, we are going to take a look at Angular forms and two-way data binding. So these are two of the most core and important concepts in Angular because forms, well, they're pretty much the heart of most enterprise applications. Now, before we continue, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to this channel and stay up to date with the latest courses that will sharpen your programming skills. Like I said, forms are the heart of many enterprise applications. And in Angular, we are going to see how to enable forms because by default they are not enabled. So this might seem a little bit strange if we're coming from an Angular 1 AngularJS context. Then we are going to see and we're going to discuss implement actually template-driven forms. Now in Angular there are template-driven forms and reactive forms. So template-driven forms, like their name suggests, basically we use the ngModel directive. So we use ngModel for two-way data binding, and we just declare, we work declaratively. So we declare in our template, this field is bound with this property, this field is bound with this property, and then two-way data binding actually occurs. Now in reactive forms is more of a model-based, a model-driven form approach, and it's a lot more flexible than template-driven forms, but I think it's only suitable for more complex applications or forms with really high number of fields. Now in this demo we're going to focus on template-driven forms, and then if you get the hang of it, we can go to the Angular site and you can explore the other reactive version. Now we're also going to submit form data to the server, perform validation, and see how we get this end-to-end solution. And we're going to use the feedback component. Now if we remember our Notit application, it has a feedback section where users can type their email address, their name, and some comments for us, and then they hit submit and we should receive their comments, their feedback via email. So that's what we're going to do next. In this demo, we are going to create this feedback component. So we are going to add 3 fields for username, user email, and the actual feedback, and a button. So when the user clicks submit, we should receive an email with his feedback. Now we'll fire up IntelliJ, open our project. Now, like I told you, the first thing that we need to do when you want to use forms is to enable them. Now, it's exactly like routes. I mean, by default, the routing was not enabled for our application and we had to import it. And to do it, we actually had to add an import statement here. And we're going to do the same for forms. So I want to import the forms module. And then here in the import section, I also want to import the forms module. I think it's forms. Should be getting some IntelliSense. Okay, forms module. And no, that's it. Okay, so import forms module and then add it in our app ngModel imports section. Okay, so now that we have forms enabled, the next thing that we have to do is we need to add some input fields to our feedback component. So we'll go to our feedback component in the HTML, okay? And this feedback component now it's empty. And we are going to delete it. And what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to copy paste this piece of code because it's a lot to type and it will just save us some time. But this is pure HTML. We have no bindings, so we're going to go through the step of the process. Now it's a simple form. Okay, we have 3 fields. So I have an input for the first name, I have another input for the email, and another input for the feedback, which is just a text area, and then I have a button for sending the feedback. But right now it's pure HTML. There is no binding, there is no interaction with the component. It's just dummy data. And now if you open our application, now we have these 3 fields, okay, which is pretty cool, and a button that, well, does nothing. Okay, so we've managed to take care of our HTML. Now let's add in some logic. Now, when we want to submit the form, I don't know if you remember, but we need to reach this controller. So we need to reach the feedback controller, and we need to reach this method. And we have to pass in a feedback view model. Now, a feedback view model has a name, email, and feedback. And we can double check it if you go to the noted HTTP. So here somewhere you'll find feedback. So if you want to post feedback, this is the kind of HTTP request that we have to initiate from Angular. So all we need is these two free components, and we need to provide input in Angular. Okay, so switching back to our Angular application, let's create an interface. Export interface for the feedback view model. Okay, feedback view model. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to replicate this object. I'm trying to replicate this server object, so that they match. So feedback view model will have a name of type string, we'll have email of type string, and we'll have feedback of type string. Okay, so very simple interface, one-on-one with what we have on the backend. And in my feedback component TS file, in this component, I want to declare an instance of this method. So I'm going to declare a property model of type feedback view model. Okay, and I'm going to assign some default values because I don't want to work with nulls. So I'm going to say, I think this is the syntax, name, email is this, and feedback is this. And I sure hope, okay, yeah, it's correct. Okay, so my component now has a property model of type feedback view model. And we are going to use two-way binding in our template to actually bind the input fields to this property right here. Now, how can we do it? Well, we go back to our feedback component, and okay, we have the first input of type text, okay, the first name, and I'm going to add in ngModel. Okay, ngModel, sorry, and it's going to be model dot, and we have IntelliSense model dot name. Okay, and notice that we have ngModel and we surround it with brackets and then with square brackets. So because we use both of them, what we say is that this property, it has two-way binding enabled. So if I modify something in here, it will get propagated to this property here in the TS file, and if you programmatically modify something in this TS file, it will automatically get propagated here. Here. Okay. So I have done this. Oh, and we also have to pass in a name because this is, this is an input field, and because we're enough, but we actually have name. Sorry. I think IntelliJ is a little bit overzealous on this one. Okay, so ngModel, and now for email, I want to do pretty much the same thing. I want to create a two-way binding with model.email property. So I'm going to say ngModel equals model.email, and I'm going to do the same thing for feedback. So ngModel equals model.feedback. Okay, so by adding ngModel to my input fields, I've now created two-way binding between my template and this property on the feedback component. Now let's just see if everything works. So I'm going to create an action here called so it's going to be send feedback. Okay, it will return void, and I just want to print in, so I want to this dot model dot name. Okay, just to see that everything is working as expected. Now send feedback. I think I made a mistake here. Yeah, actually should be function. Okay, no, sorry, IntelliJ again. This is just right. Okay, and now in my feedback component on submit, so when the user clicks submit, I think it's submit, I want to bind to that method on my components. So it's going to be send feedback. So when we click on the submit event, we're going to call send feedback, which is this method. And if we write something in the model name, we should get an alert with the correct name. And this is a pretty fast way to check that we have everything in order. So I'm going to hit refresh, and I'm going to write then, and I'm going to send a feedback. And well, guess what? It doesn't work. Then send feedback. Okay, let's look at this. So it should alert the model name, which it doesn't, and we have on submit, and we have send feedback. Oh yeah, sorry, my bad. Okay, so the submit event is not on the button. We actually need to add the submit event on the form itself. So submit is actually send feedback. Okay, reload it, write something in here, send feedback, and we get this message. So yeah, sorry about this, guys. Got a little bit confused. So when you're using forms and you want to submit them, you can use the submit event on the form itself, and then you pass in this method. You don't have to, you don't put it in the submit button. Okay, cool. So now this appears to be working. Let's continue and add our functionality and send the data captured here over HTTP to our backend. In order to send data via HTTP, we first need to add some dependencies to our project. Now, as you saw before, forms is not enabled by default, routing is not enabled by default, and neither is the HTTP client. So before we can do anything related to HTTP, we need to add that dependency in our application. And the best place to do that is in the main module of our app. In our case, the app module. So in the app module, I want to import HTTP client module. Okay, so I imported the HTTP client module, and we also need to add it here in the import statement. Okay, so I'm going to add HTTP client module. Okay, now we have the HTTP client dependency, and we can start using HTTP in our application. So we can go back to our feedback component, and because we have the module declared in the app.module class, we can actually inject it. So here I can declare a dependency on HTTP client. Well, I can spell it like HTTP of type HTTP client, just to keep things a little shorter. Okay, and now our feedback component has a dependency on the HTTP client, and Angular's dependency resolution mechanism will make sure that when this component is initialized, we also receive an instance of an HTTP client. Cool, so we have this, and now we need to modify the send feedback method, because right now we are alerting a name, but we actually want to send this data from here to our backend. So what we have to do is, okay, we can call the HTTP client, and we can say post, because on the backend we have a post method, and we have to send in the URL, which we didn't define yet. So let's do that. So our URL is http localhost 8082-api-feedback. So basically the URL is this one. If you go back to our Spring application, okay, so we need to reach localhost 82-api-feedback, and this is the method that we need to target, and we need to pass in a feedback view model, which is just a simple JSON object with those three properties that we mentioned earlier. Okay, so we can pass in the URL in the post method and the data that we want to send, and in our case it's the model property of this component. And now we can subscribe to this event, okay, and we have on success, which is okay, we can do something here, and we also have an error event. Okay, so if an error occurs during the request, we can simply alert, you know, an error has occurred while sending feedback, and if the post is successful, we can just reload our page. Okay, so we just remove what the user entered, we reload the page, and we give him the possibility to add another feedback. Okay, so now this is the send feedback method, and one last thing that we need to do. So we have ngSubmit in here, not submit. You know, initially I typed submit, but it's actually the ngSubmit event. And I think we are actually good to go. Let's just add a breakpoint in our Spring Boot app. So, okay, I have a breakpoint in here. And now let's just refresh the page. Refresh the page. I can type in Dan, I can type in, you know, my email, and some message. Okay, send feedback, and now, okay, we have a breakpoint, we have our feedback view model in here with pretty much everything that we need. So this action is actually executing correctly. Hit continue, remove the breakpoint, and if we go in the browser, okay, form successfully, and we have a page reload. And now if we go to mailtrap.io, which is the mail server that we used in our application, we should have an instance of this email. So I go to testing box, and look, I have new feedback. Oh, just let me refresh my mail. Okay, new feedback from Dan. This is my email, and this is the nonsense feedback that I just wrote. So the mail was actually sent a few seconds ago, so this functionality is actually working. Before we close this video, I just want to show you one more thing. I want you to imagine that for some reason, and this happens to me quite a lot, especially when I start a new project, let's say you forget, for example, to import the forms module. I mean, everything else will work. You'll not get any compile errors. You can still use everything in the ngModel and everything that you see here. But if you forget to import a module, let's see what happens. So first of all, you start to get these little squiggly thingies in here because suddenly ngModel is not available. But let's assume that you don't have an editor that is capable of doing this. Well, if we try to load our page, we will get an error like the one in here. So we will get okay, so you'll get something like this: can't bind to ngModel since it isn't a known property of input. So this is the kind of error that you get when you forget to import that module, and I want you to know this because it's not very meaningful. I mean, the first time you see this, it doesn't pop up in your mind that maybe you forgot to import the module. So just to be aware, if you forget to, if you're getting errors like this, and you're absolutely sure that you typed everything in your template correctly, then you probably forgot to import that module. Before we close, I would like to remind you to subscribe to this channel and stay tuned for more software development tutorials that will sharpen your programming skills. Just go to the Romanian Coder YouTube page and click on the subscribe button. Also, if you found this video useful, please hit the like button and share it with your friends. If you have any comments, thoughts, or ideas for new courses, just put them in the comment section at the end of this video, because I would love to get feedback from you guys. You can also find me on Twitter at Romanian Coder, and you can also check out my blog www.romaniancoder.com. Until next time, have a great day and write amazing code. Goodbye.